Good afternoon. Welcome to Breaking the Silence, Shifting Perspectives, Evolving Narratives and Representations of Filipino Comfort Women with Katherine G. Lacson. Thanks for joining us, whether you're here on site at Ayala Museum or online via Zoom and Facebook Live. Let's begin our program. My name is Charlene Diaz, and I'm the head of programs for Filipinas Heritage Library. I'll also be your host for today's event. Katherine G. Lacson concludes the second Roderick Hall Memorial Lectures by exploring a complex and multi-layered topic with sensitivity and nuance. In Breaking the Silence, Shifting Perspectives, Evolving Narratives and Representations of Filipino Comfort Women, Dr. Lacson gives a voice to a history that is often silenced. But before we delve into these narratives, I would like to thank Ms. Consuelo Hall McHugh and family for their generous support in making this lecture series possible. Each talk in the series promotes a uniquely Filipino experience of World War II and how the legacy of the war continues to be felt in present times. By doing so, each talk activates an element of the Roderick Hall collection of FHL that Mr. Hall built over his lifetime. Now, let's hear from some of Roderick Hall's closest collaborators as they pay tribute to a dear friend.
Rod described himself as a man with a mission and a man in a hurry. His mission was to collect as many materials on the experiences of Filipinos during World War II and to place them in a library that would ensure that these are shared with today's generation as well as those in the future. And he found this repository as well as partners with us in the Filipinas Heritage Library. So in 2010, Rod shipped his entire collection, lock, stock, and barrel, of 700 volumes from his home in London to FHL in Makati. Through the years, his collection has grown to more than 2,000 print and non-print materials on World War II, making the Roderick Hall collection FHL's crown jewel. As such, it is FHL's centerpiece, literally and figuratively, because we now revolve our collection focus around the period immediately before, during, and right after World War II, identified as the formative period of Filipino nationhood.
To collect books and various other historical materials relating to the Philippines during that war and to make this more accessible to the general public. He turned this collection over to the Filipinas Heritage Library, where it now forms a major part of its holdings as the Roderick Hall Collection. But Rod was not one to simply donate books. He wanted other people to use them and to research more on the war. He wanted to add more materials and was constantly in search of new directions for the collection. To this end, he was able to negotiate digitization of numerous manuscripts in various collections around the Philippines. He wanted to provide as many different perspectives as possible, and when he learned of the large body of works in Japanese, aimed to acquire as much as possible for the collection.
Why are you collecting Japanese publications about the Battle of Philippines, even though you do not understand Japanese language? You said to me. I always answer this question like that. I want next future generation to know what happened in Philippines during the Asia-Pacific War and the Philippines under Japanese rule. However, you told me the real reason is that collecting Japanese books is to make peace of my mind and making requiem for my deceased family. As a post-war Japanese generation, I promise you to try to make no more war society, and also to try not to create the kind of people such as you and your family horribly experienced in Philippines. I think the Japanese should know the facts of his history. I believe this is my mission as a Japanese.
Current thinking on the previous century, with its many upheavals and wars, is that we all have an ethical obligation to remember that history. But understandably, not everyone takes up that burden because the memory of war, especially for persons who witnessed it, is painful. The late Mr. Rod Hall was deeply courageous in that sense of taking up an ethical burden. He took pains to give World War II its proper mourning, not just for himself, but also for our country, America and Japan, whose materials he collected. He helped strengthen our cultural memory in the hope of preventing the return of suffering. And now with his passing, we in turn at Filipinos Heritage Library and Ayala Foundation have an obligation to make his legacy and his commemoration of history endure.
Now let me introduce our speaker. Katherine G. Lacson is an assistant professor of the Department of History at Ateneo de Manila University. She took her PhD at the University of Côte d'Azur in Nice, France. Her main research interests are Philippine history, women's studies, visual history, and business history. She was also involved in the production and research of various award-winning documentary projects on Philippine history. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Katherine G. Lacson.
Hello to everybody. Before anything else, I would like to take this opportunity to thank the Filipinas Heritage Library for inviting me to be part of the second Roderick Memorial Hall Lectures. I would also like to thank everybody here on site and on Zoom for taking the time out to actually join us here and taking time out of your schedule to be able to listen to the lecture. Very much appreciated. So in line with this, the title of my talk today is Breaking the Silence, Shifting Perspectives, Evolving Narratives, and Representations of Filipino Comfort Women. Okay, so that everybody, in order for us to all be on the same page, because the topic is actually very wide, no, and very deep, and very serious, and very complex, I would like to introduce the flow of the lecture so that you would know what we're going to be going through. So the first part would be, I'm going to give a general overview, after which I'm going to be giving a background on comfort stations, because you can't talk about comfort women without talking about comfort stations. No? Afterwards, I'm going to be talking about Filipino women and war, which will segue into narratives, some narratives and representations of comfort women. and then I will summarize it, and then we will have some time for Q&A, for question and answer. No? When Charlene and I were talking about it, I said, what do I talk about? Because there's a lot of topics to talk about. She said, I think we have to have at least, the general audience should know some idea, should get some idea about comfort stations and comfort women. And so, with that in mind, let's start. Okay. So, Jugun Yanfu, or military comfort women, is a euphemism used to pertain to the community of women who were forced to serve as sex slaves of the Japanese Imperial Army in World War II. It actually involved the systematic planning and forcible drafting and/or abduction of about 100,000 to 250,000 Asian women. It involved the establishment, control, and management of army brothels, or what we know as comfort stations. And it was put in all garrisons in Manchuria, parts of China, Korea, the Philippines, the South Sea Islands, Malaysia, and Indonesia. So hindi tayo nag-iisa, right? Most of the women from these countries were conscripted, kidnapped, forcibly detained, raped, and condemned to sexual slavery were young girls between 11 to 20 years old. Okay? And so historians actually estimated that fewer than 30% of them survived the ordeal by the end of the war. According to the book Justice in Healing, those who survived this horrendous experience were severely traumatized, exhibiting post-traumatic stress symptoms, and many were unable to have normal family lives because of their experience. So before we go on, because that's a backgrounder on comfort women, we're going to be talking about them a little bit more later, I need to talk about the sources. It's a very important topic for this one. No? I looked at this topic by looking at published works, some archival documents, historical accounts, biographies, autobiographies, and newspaper articles. I'm going to clear it out that I did not touch on literature and art. Those are sources as well for this topic. I will leave that to more adept hands, no, of literature majors and stuff. I will not touch on that, okay? So, and before I continue, I need to talk about documents and oral history, okay? So, it's important to talk about the importance of oral history, especially in the construction of the life stories of women. Because as Thelma Quintanar pointed out, this historical technique has been utilized in women's studies as a way of breaking the silence, right, regarding women's lives and work. Because more often than not, if you would notice it, it's hard to find women's stories. It's very difficult, no? Especially if you look at official documents. So why do I need to talk about this? This is really important because at one point in the story of the comfort women, the veracity of their existence was actually questioned or even negated due to the lack of official documents stating that they actually existed, right? So this is very much understandable in the work of a historian that we all need evidence, no? And our best evidence is located in the documents that we find. Yun yung resibo natin eh. Right? That's the receipt, no? But there is a point, especially for women's story or her story, as we sort of like point to, no? That most of the things that happened to her is very much hidden in the private sphere. So that is where oral history and spoken word comes in. As Kamagay would write, these will become effective instruments in recreating the past. No? So with that in mind, let us start with a backgrounder on comfort stations. So, before I even talk about this, I have to give a caveat, no? Because when I was writing this part of the script, I don't know what happened, but suddenly, my keyboard started writing gibberish. I'm like, namumulto ba ako? Minumulto ba ako ng mga hapon na ayaw kong isulat ito, no? Parang ganyan, no? But it really happened. So, I had to stop, clean my keyboard, and go back to write it again, and hope finally there's no gibberish, no? So, what is a comfort station, right? Who thought of this idea, this system? When did it begin, and why was it even created? Okay? So the origins of the comfort system can be actually traced to the 1904-1905 Russo-Japanese War. There was a historian who actually found Japanese diaries explaining that brothels were actually being built, and most were actually being staffed by Chinese women. Okay. This early setup actually laid the groundwork for future military policies on military prostitution, as can be seen in subsequent regulations for soldiers in Siberia between 1918 and 1922. So the troops there were unhappy and they were actually contracting sexually transmitted diseases. Okay? So this led to the new rules on the local prostitutes that were actually servicing the soldiers. So they needed now to get a medical clearance before they could actually work as prostitutes. No? And this would become a key characteristic of the comfort system because this was actually supposed to manage the health of the soldiers. Okay, so March 1932, during the Second Sino-Japanese War, the Japanese military officers utilized this experience of managing a prototype of a comfort station to address reports of soldiers raping left and right Chinese women. Okay, so the vice chief of staff of the Shanghai Expeditionary Forces wrote in his diary that as long as the conditions are actually peaceful and there is no fight, the men will rape because they have nothing to do. So he said, I am actually creating, so I think we should recognize the fact that we need to actively provide facilities for that. Very systematic, no? So I have considered many options, policy options for resolving the troops' sexual problems and have set to work on realizing the goal. That is why a year after, a disease prevention and hygiene facility, that was the name, no, was established for the 14th Mixed Brigade in Pingquan. Although not explicitly labeled as such, historians actually recognize this as the first and earliest confirmed comfort station. Okay. By the end of 1937, the comfort system had been integrated into the military's infrastructure, and stations were strategically established wherever troops were actually stationed. The systematization in question has been mostly attributed to the Nanjing Massacre or the rape of Nanking. And so the rationale for creating the comfort system were as follows. First, to curb the venereal diseases that were sort of like contaminating. It's going everywhere among the troops, no? The next one is to increase the lawlessness of the troops. They have something to do. It was also considered as a consolation prize because the war was getting longer and longer. So this was their time. They were pointing out this was their only source of comfort. Okay? And so there was also a psychological and superstitious place. The superstition actually plays a role there as well, wherein there was this belief that sex before battle protected a soldier from harm and boosted their morale, promoted discipline, aroused courage, and relieved stress. Okay. So, that's interesting, no? When you think about it, no? The underlying premise at work in that development of comfort stations, when you think about it, was that men required sex to function in a war, no? I mean, when you look at that, right? When you look at that, it's a heavy, and I was like, and when I was reading through it, trust me, I have to always stop when I was reading through sources because it's a heavy topic. But then there was this thought, kasi parang yun yung kinailangan for the troops to be okay, diba? So, war was thought to increase a man's sexual desires, and without legitimate outlet, troops would inevitably resort to rape. Okay. So this comfort system would actually have remained a secret had it not been for a historian named Yoshimi Yoshiaki. He was able to uncover military documents about these stations from the Japanese Self-Defense Agency archives in January 1992. When you think it historically, very recent, right? Very recent. So prior to the revelation of these documents, the official stance of the Japanese government was that the nation-state bore no responsibility for providing reparations to the comfort women. This was due to the fact that the comfort stations, they pointed out, had not been operated by the military, but were operated by civilian-operated brothels. So they said, it was not our system. It's a private thing where you get prostitutes there, no? So the retrieval of the papers in 1992 actually prompted the Japanese government to ultimately acknowledge its military participation in stations and to deliver a contentious apology, because there's that whole issue with that, no? To the former comfort women. Okay, so now that we have a backgrounder on comfort stations, because I needed to talk about that for you to understand where we're going to go to, no? Let us now go talk about Filipino women and war. taking a literal page from the exhibit, from the Filipinas Heritage Library's exhibit on women in war, we will see that many women, Filipinas, were forced into roles and situations during the Japanese occupation that tested her mettle, both as a woman and as a human being. So to begin the story of that, I would like to use some narratives culled from various published works, biographies and autobiographies, to capture some of the stories during the Japanese period. And a lot of these were actually found in the Roderick Hall collection. Okay? So, let me start with the introduction, December 8, 1941. I think everybody knows what happened December 8, 1941, right? Taking a page from Katinka Floro Rodriguez's book entitled Birthdays in the Cemetery, A Childhood in World War II of Manila. She was talking about the drones were now flying all over Manila. And everybody was actually going there, no? And I'll read a little bit. My father and brothers had been glued to the radio earlier that day, listening to the news about the unprovoked attack. The much talked about war had begun. It was December 8, 1941, a religious holiday in the Philippines. No one, not even General Douglas MacArthur, had thought the Philippines would be the next target of the Japanese. The neighborhood men, all home from work due to the holiday, because it was a holiday, awakened from their midday siestas, were also running towards the end of the block where a wisp of dark smoke and swirling dust marked the area where the bomb had been dropped, because there was a bomb that dropped in the place. The women of our neighborhood in Santa Cruz, district of Manila, stayed at home, praying and peeking from the iron-barred windows in the Philippines, because it was considered immodest for women to go running out into the street, giving you a taste of the times, no? They would get their news of the incident later from their children and husbands. I glanced up at the people looking out their windows at the hole made by the bomb, recognized three bailarinas, dance hall girls, who would always pass by our house every afternoon on their way to work. This is a very interesting narrative that I chose from Rodriguez because it actually is a good jump-off point to show you that before that, these were the representations of women. This was the life, and there was the modest and immodest, no? But while at the same time giving us perspective, na what will be the changes that will happen to the lives of the Filipinas once the Japanese actually enters the country? Okay. So, the next vignettes will give us a glimpse of the fears and scenarios that women faced once the Japanese actually occupied the country. Taking from all of these books, the first one would be nervous breakdown among mothers and daughters in the family. Through rumors, it was made known that Japanese soldiers occupying towns they conquered molested women, married and unmarried, and even those in the convent were violated. The news caused fright and unknown terrors among the mothers and girls in the family. No one actually was spared, right? Girls at the time were made to look like boys by their parents, so they would not be attractive to the Japanese. However, there were some women who cohabited with the Japanese willingly, either for their family's safety or because they were spying for the guerrillas. It is interesting to note this story about women cohabiting with the Japanese willingly, whether for safety or because they wanted to spy, no? Because it can also be said that this was a better alternative for them compared to actually being brought to a comfort station and becoming a comfort women. So during the time, this can be seen as a lesser evil between two choices, if you can even call it that, right? I heard the adults talk about rape. Because as we said, in any war, women are usually part of the spoils for the victors, becoming the most direct victims of war violence, and rape becomes the inevitable fact of war. At that time, Filipino women were distinctive native dress in two pieces and long skirt draped by an overskirt and a white thin blouse made of native fibers. So basically, women were trying to be either, they had to look old, ugly, or even look like men. And I even had a story from a student of mine who was saying that from her, yung kwento ng mga lolo nila, no? They were saying na yung mga ibang lalaki din were actually trying to wear women's garb. Because it's sad for to say this, yung description, no? To be raped rather than to die. So there was, again, what the heck is the choice, right? Okay. No one went against the wishes of the Japanese, especially in civilian communities. They got everything. Or they could seize women or girls who caught their fancy. Oftentimes, the girls are not heard from anymore. The Japanese turned many of them into the so-called comfort women to cater to the sexual needs of the Japanese military. The soldiers from the highest ranks to the lowest took their turns with the women. I actually included this passage from the book Rites of Passage because it's one of the few books that I actually saw that used the word comfort women when they were narrating the story, which actually goes to show you that if you actually wrote something before 1992, you wouldn't even be able to actually utilize the word correctly or the way we know it now. So you can see that it's a very important, in a way, contribution to be able to actually write about that and talk about that. No? So, as one can see from the vignettes I just showed you, the narratives of women being raped was very much part and parcel of their stories. Being raped by one person is actually already is both traumatic and horrifying, but it becomes even more dangerous once it becomes institutionalized and systematized, which is what happened within the confines of the comfort stations that mushroomed in the various places in the country. So, how did the stories of the comfort women come out in the open? Because it wasn't talked about, right, for a really long time. How did the narratives and representations evolve throughout the years? This is basically from Maria Rosa Henson's, she was the one who actually drew this, no? For a long period of time after World War II, those who suffered and became war sex slaves of the Japanese suffered in silence. These comfort women were invisible, powerless, and unknown entities. And there are varying reasons for the lack of narratives during the first decades of the war. Here are some of the possible reasons. There were many patriarchal and religious notions of virtue and morality that drove a wedge between the survivor and her family and society. No? Societal and cultural prejudices mark rape victims as unclean. Even social privilege or social class offered no protection from the taint of having been a wartime prostitute or rape victim. At times, this would even be detrimental because the family would not want to taint their reputation. And then in academic and international discourses, Mendoza's work said that the term comfort women can actually be misunderstood as a generic term for sex workers and victims of human trafficking. So why would you want to go out there when you'll be stigmatized by this? And in another story of Maria Rosa Henson, she would actually alternately refer to the sexual activity with Japanese soldiers as work and rape. Because in the institutionalization and systematization of the system, nagkaroon ng proseso na, trabaho rin ba talaga to? So there was already the stigma and the pain of the trauma of being raped, but there was also this whole thing of being so ashamed of the fact that you're supposed to be a prostitute. No? So, ang daming kalaban, right? So as a result, a considerable number of survivors concealed their role as comfort women to spare their loved ones from stigma associated with rape. Conversely, some were even suppressed by the very people they sought solace from. So, when did the tide turn? The process was actually long and arduous. The world had to change first. And many of its issues needed to be discussed, including the idea of women's rights as human rights. Because it wasn't considered that, no? For a long time. So this was where the existence of the comfort women was actually introduced. Okay. So in 1991, 3 former Korean comfort women filed a compensation suit against the Japanese government, claiming that they had been forced to serve in military brothels during World War II. Kim Hak-soon was the first to publicly recount her experience, and her testimony forced Tokyo to acknowledge the role of the Japanese Imperial Army in establishing comfort stations, while continuing to deny that the women were forced to provide sex. Okay. After that, women activists and grassroots movements had weekly demonstrations in the Japanese embassy in Seoul. And after the Japanese government was then compelled to prepare a report on the subject in 1992 and 1993 with the collective influence of organizations such as the United Nations and the International Commission of Jurists, who were made aware of the problem by the Korean Council for Women. In 1992, the report recognized the military's participation in the system, but it again refuted the coerced nature of women's conscription. Furthermore, it declined to recognize the testimonials of the surviving comfort women, there's the story of the documents, right, as a substantiation of the use of force. The case, that's why the findings, the documentary evidence that Yoshiaki Yoshimi found was actually very important, because now it proves that all of these testimonials really happened, and it happened in a specific space. No? So, in 1992, the United Nations Commission on Human Rights initiated a sequence of inquiries and hearings that brought about a significant change in the way comfort women were represented. In contrast to the perspective held prior to this United Nations discussion, which characterized women as individuals emerged in prostitution, the international community has subsequently redefined them as victims of military sexual enslavement, a war crime committed by the Japanese state. It's interesting. The alteration in the significance, classification, and portrayal resulted in the rapid dissemination of knowledge regarding the comfort women. An increasing number of women have self-identified as survivors of comfort stations after that. There's truly power in words, when we think about it. With a change in category and meaning from prostitute to victim, more women found the courage to finally break the silence. So in a way, when you think about it, the word victim or victimhood became powerful words actually in this context, because it erased the stigma that it connoted with a comfort women. So we always have to think of the words, di ba? Mayroong reason yan, may kontekstong pinagagalingan yan. Okay. So, some of the narratives that came about because of this whole change was from prostitute to victim to now victor. And I took this one from Sheila Coronel's chapter in the book 7 in the Eye of History, where she talks about Maria Rosa Henson and the fight. No? So she was stating that in 1992, nearly 50 years after Henson has been adopted, she finally was able to shed light for a topic that has been in the dark for decades. And she said that she came out to the open at all is testimony to her courage and estimation of her worth. For how else can an old woman of peasant origin who had lived most of her life in the slums of Pasay muster the audacity to tell the world that she had been wronged and that history had to be set right? So, despite believing that she is a slave of destiny, because that's the title that she said, I want that title to be there, slave of destiny, because she felt that she was a slave of destiny with her story, she was able to actually defy the hands of fate and took over her narrative when she decided to tell her story. Justice with Healing and The Woman of Mapanique, a lot of the readings, the biographies, autobiographies, would really about, the representation would be Lola's grandmothers. They are mostly elderly and coming from poor families, lacking in any connection or networks. Various women's organizations needed to actually organize and support them, right? So some of these organizations are Lila Pilipina, the Flowers for Lola campaign, Pamana, United Nations, and of course the United Nations Subcommission on Prevention and Discrimination and Protection of Minorities. These lolas were part of following organizations that fought for redress. No? There were the Liga Filipina Lolas, the Malaya Lolas, and the Lolas Campañera para sa Kapayapaan at Kompensasyon. Okay. They shared their narratives in books such as Slave of Destiny, The Women of Mapanique, and Justice and Healing. Like, for example, Slave of Destiny by Maria Rosa Henson sets her ordeal of military sexual slavery against the backdrop of her poverty-stricken mother's sexual abuse at the hands of a wealthy landowner, which she believes she inherited as part of her destiny. Hence the title, Slave of Destiny. Okay? And of course, the books on Women of Mapanique and Justice and Healing contained autobiographical narratives of lolas of the comfort women movement and the testimony of female survivors in various places in the country. Another narrative and representation that we will see is about mothers. Okay? In this book, My Mother, the title speaks for itself. No? My mother is more than a comfort woman. These are basically 4 stories coming from stories of families' perspectives, stating that, yes, my mother was a comfort woman, but she is more than that. And their point here is that they wanted to show that the next generation of what truly happened, and at the same time, maybe the next generation can take up the cudgels because the numbers of the lolas who were actually survivors are sort of decreasing as the years go by. So, another representation, aside from the grandmothers and mothers, was the usual representation of young and innocent girls, virgins, and ghosts. Okay. So, a good example of this is the hidden battle of Leyte, where Phileas talks about her experience in the Japanese occupation through a young girl's picture diary. So, medyo may ano nga doon na parang ang hirap din tingnan kasi parang you're looking at a young girl's drawings while you're reading very heavy material. Okay? So, it's interesting, Mendoza actually pointed out here that the construct of an ideal victim is one who is prepubescent and virginal. And it's interesting because she would even say that this is actually problematic if you're just talking about virgins and grannies, because there were really also comfort women who were already sexually active when they were conscripted or basically put in the comfort stations. But again, there's the political aspect of it, diba? Na parang how do we make our voices heard? Then we have to actually push all of these representations in place, right? Okay. The Lola's redress movement seeks reparations on behalf of the girls they used to be, therefore the virgin ghosts, who never became proper women because of what has been done to them. And of course, the representation of the survivor, the courageous fighter for the redress movement, and political figures. Okay? The emergence of the comfort women activism, as I stated a while ago, started in Korea. And Filipino feminists actually took the helm once they heard about what was happening. And it started with a women's activist conference in 1991. In March 1992, 7 women's groups met in Manila to set up the task force on Filipina comfort women to do research and to try to find survivors of the Japanese comfort stations. Maria Rosa Henson was one of the people who actually heard the radio appeals, and she became the first one to publicly come out as a comfort woman in the comfort stations. In April 2, 1993, Henson and 45 other Filipino comfort women went to the Tokyo District Court to file a lawsuit against the Japanese government, which they eventually lost from the lower courts in 1998, as well as the Tokyo Appellate Court in 2000. On December 25, 2023, very recent, no? The Japanese Supreme Court dismissed the lawsuit of the Filipino comfort women due to the limitations of their legal system in complying with the international laws. We need to talk about this. In 1994, through Japanese legislative and cabinet decision, the Asian Women's Fund, or AWF, was conceived. The AWF was established in July 1995 to offer atonement and necessary assistance from the Japanese people to each identified comfort women. The Redress Project is coming from supposedly one of the major plans of the Prime Minister during that time, Tomiichi Murayama, to demonstrate Japan's remorse over torments inflicted on Asian people under Japan's rule. And in 1995, he made an official statement about it, which will be a statement that will be subsequently endorsed by the next Japanese governments after that. Okay. From the project, it's supposed to be that they would be getting around, because I looked at the project brief of DFA and the SWD for this. It was written that each Lola will receive 1.2 million yen, approximately 300,000 for a period of 5 years, and the assistance shall respond to the medical and social welfare of the Lolas. The clientele shall be the Lolas who were former comfort women, and this is a very important part as well, identified by Asian Women's Fund who have received the atonement money, right? So, but the thing is, not everybody who was actually who were fighting to get compensation and basically apology weren't part of this identification. And so the fight continues, no? The AWF has been under fire since Murayama announced the idea. Victims criticized the Japanese government, saying it tried to avoid taking responsibilities by recruiting private contributions rather than appropriating money for the fund from the government itself, thereby reducing the issue of legal redress to a mere payoff, insulting the victims and the movement for justice. Women's groups objected to the fund and saw it as an attempt by the Japanese government to deny its complicity in a grievous crime and shirk its responsibility from the women who were victims. In the Philippines, during that time, the leadership between Liga Filipina and Rosa Henson was also sort of turning a little bit sour. And so in 1996, Henson actually decided to go against the, I will not join, I will not get the fund, no? She decided to be the first beneficiary of the Asian Women's Fund. At that point, the women's groups were still very adamant against the fund, seeing it as an unprincipled compromise over the issue that deserved official recognition. Henson saw it differently. Quite simply, she said she needed the money. Okay. She stated that the Korean women could actually afford to turn the money down because their government provided generously for them. There was no similar provision from the Philippine government. She also said that availing herself of the fund did not mean that she would stop the fight for official compensation, because she's part of the plaintiff, right? She was there, no? And she did not see that the drawing of the fund was compensation for the crime that was committed to her, because as she said, no amount of money can compensate for what has been done to me. So to sort of close this, no? No one really knows the true number of Filipinas who became comfort women during the Japanese occupation. Those who were sexually violated hid behind a wall of silence. Okay. It was only through the passage of time that this silence was slowly broken. The narrative had to change from prostitute to victim to victor, and that silence grew into ayop as the Filipino comfort women took back their power by controlling the narrative one story at a time. As Quintana wrote, the recollections together project images of common themes in the experience of survivors of the occupation and contribute to the building of a national or group memory of the event. But the question remains as to whether it will ever really be possible to have healing for these comfort women. At present, the story of the comfort women and their fight for redress and justice is still not done. There is still no full reparation from the Japanese government for their aggression and war crimes. The Lola statue that you can see there, which was initially erected along Rojas Boulevard in December 2017, was dismantled in April 27, 2018. It was an unnamed woman dressed in traditional Filipino dress, blindfolded and clutching her hands to her bosom. It was declared missing in August 2019. How can one big be suddenly gone? Okay. Questions for the, right? Questions. 2 days after its January 2019 unveiling, an additional comfort women's statue depicting a young woman with her fists resting on her knee was removed from the Mary Mother of Mercy shelter for the elderly and the homeless in San Pedro, Laguna. The remaining Filipino comfort women Lola statue is presently located in Pandan, Antique. Depending on what you read, the number of comfort women who are still alive range from 40 to only 8. So, because I was having a lot of sources, no? So there some sources would say it's 40, some sources would say it's 30, some sources would say it's 8. But whether it's 40 or 30 or 8, as the number of survivors decrease, no? And efforts to sanitize history and distort narratives and distort the distortion of narratives persist, the urgency is highlighted by the Comfort Women campaign. In the article of Lila Ramos Shahani, Comfort Women and the Political Economy of Erasure in the Philippines, she referred to political economy as the confluence of political and economic forces that generate discourses and practices related to national development, particularly with respect to projects focused in infrastructural growth. Such forces often work to marginalize the rights and interests of women, especially those deemed to be food or income poor. In this context, former comfort women as survivors of rape and war from lower class backgrounds have been particularly stigmatized. The erasure of comfort women from historical consciousness is precisely the effect of the political economic forces that allowed and continue to perpetuate the violence they experienced. In relation to this, a Washington Post article dated May 31, 2019, talked about President Rodrigo Duterte's visit to Tokyo and inking a $6 billion business deal. The year before that, he said he did not want to antagonize Japan by pressing the issue. Close in quote marks, insofar as I am concerned, that's over. So for Sharon Silva, who's the director of Lila Filipina during this specific article, no? Insofar as I am, it's easy to understand why she was stating that it's easy to understand why Japan does what it does. But for the Philippine government, it's incomprehensible. Sadly, the Philippine government prioritized strengthening the nation's economic relationship with Japan over pursuing an apology and reparations for the former comfort women. On March 11, 2023, the United Nations Committee on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, or the CEDAW, found that the Philippines, as a state party, failed to honor the obligations under the 1979 Convention on all forms of discrimination against women. The committee also included that the government failed to protect the rights of 24 complainants of the Malaya Lolas against continuing discrimination. So following this, on May 13, 2013, the current president that we have right now ordered government agencies to address the concerns of the comfort women and grant full reparation, including material compensation and an official apology for the continuing discrimination. But in the response that they actually gave to CEDAW, in the paper that they submitted on September 4, 2023, the Philippine government described as more imaginary than real the alleged restrictive and discriminatory provisions from legislation and policies relating to the redress of civilian victims of war, including survivors of wartime sexual violence and slavery. Sad, right? So, comfort women advocates, Flowers for Lolas campaign, Lila Filipina, Malaya Lolas are still pushing, no, for the implementation of the CEDAW recommendation and even the preservation of Bahay na Pula. Or if not, then the establishment of another space to commemorate the suffering of the victims to honor their struggle for justice. As pointed out by Mendoza, honoring and the memory of the Lolas while simultaneously taking up the daunting responsibility of telling and retelling these stories help generate future remembrances of the comfort women that celebrate the fullness of their lives, not just the depths of their losses. The dwindling number of survivors highlights, again, a sense of urgency for them to receive a formal, unequivocal public apology and just compensation from Japan, as well as an accurate historical inclusion with their voice, while their voices can still be heard, because they are usually not written in the historical works, right? Aside from the reparations, they also hope that it will end the cycle of impunity by which male leaders have been condoning, encouraging, and using wartime sexual violence without fear of consequence. So at the end of the day, the struggle is not yet over. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kate, for deftly tackling such a complex and sensitive topic about the war, and for sharing the narratives of these brave women. Let's officially open the floor for questions. Again, we have a few reminders for our on-site audience. If you have a question, please raise your hand and a member of our staff will bring you a microphone. And for our Zoom attendees, please use the Q&A box to submit your questions. We give priority to that box over questions typed in the general chat box. And for Facebook viewers, please use the comment section of the Facebook live stream. And we'll do our best to get to all of your questions during the Q&A. Kate, are you ready?
I'll try.
Okay. I
I'll
feel
try.
this might be a very heated Q&A in this very chilly room.
As I would always say to my students in the classroom, if I can answer it, I will, and if I can't, then I can't. Okay, it's as simple as that, right? Because I really don't know everything about it, right? But I know some parts of it, yeah.
And we have a question already at the back.
Hi, thank you for this. It was really, it was very enlightening to understand this in a way that, you know, how war, you know, disgraces our humanity. Well, that aside, I'm replying to something you spoke about just in the last 5 minutes, the about face of the current president from May to September, I mean, not even a 3-month gap. So when he said more imaginary than, how you put it, realistic notions of their own victimhood, is there, because of the patriarchy of that statement, is there, you know, what in terms of the oral histories of the books you've presented, what exactly is it, if we're to look at the government of the Philippines as an accountability for these families to, and the descendants of these women to get, do we perhaps look further back to the original, let's say, indigenous efforts that were made by Filipinos to create these, if it wasn't from a military staging point by the Japanese to build these homes, comfort houses, do we go back to that patriarchy that was there organizing the comfort women for the Japanese army? Does that make sense, or am
I think I get your question, right? Because
Yes.
the thing is, where did these words come from? More imaginary than real, right?
Yes.
And again, that's why I had to always talk about oral documents. Oral history and documents, because there really was that issue of there's no documents that actually points out that there's comfort stations. So if there are no comfort stations available, then there's no comfort women. And then it also relates to the Malaya Lolas. Because there's a discrimination that was going on there for the simple reason that the Malaya Lolas were supposedly not comfort women. Because the Malaya Lolas were coming from this place called Mapanike and Mapampanga. And so what happened was there was a Japanese raid in their place, and it was supposedly a raid because there was a lot of hukbalahaps there. Okay. And so what happened was, when this whole litigation happened, they were saying they weren't comfort women. They were actually part of a Japanese attack on a hukbalahap raid. And then afterwards, what would happen is they would be actually forced to bring all of the spoils in the house, and then that's the time that they were raped. And they were there for the longest time. But they were saying, but that's not a comfort station. And so there was the discrimination in terms of what is really a comfort woman. That's a comfort woman. That's why a while ago I really had to talk about documents, right? Because that's the thing, that's the issue, right? Na parang, where's the document that proves that? It's only oral history, right? There's that issue. And there would always be that push and pull when it comes to historians and the evidence. But the thing is, some people, and there's also stories stating that how can you find evidence? There was really a point wherein the Japanese were actually burning the documents to make, basically to hide what was happening during that time, right? So I get your question, na parang that's why they're coming from that, na imaginary than real. Aren't these women who are telling their testimonies already real enough? And I like what Dr. Cheng Shua talked about when he was in his talk the last time, because he was saying that it's actually oral history is very hard, because when you need to get testimonials, you have to repeat it again and again and again to make sure that what they're saying is fact. That they're not actually, I forgot wrong na. Diba? Parang ganyan, diba? So there is really that. That's why ang hirap, diba? And a while ago, I hope it's okay to say that I was talking to Madam Teresita Angsi here, who's the Flowers for Lola. She's the one campaigning for that, and that statue that was lost, no? Lost. Okay, so, and she was saying, na parang, even with the CEDAW, actually stating that the state nation had to now pay reparations to these Malaya Lolas, I mean, I heard the amount that they gave after such a long time, ma'am, right? And you said the amount was how much? 30,000. And they were still looking for, paano yung sakit? Paano, they're sickly. They need medicine. And 30,000.
Hospital who brought an ambulance because the Lolas cannot walk anymore. The youngest is 90. So she needed, we were suspecting she had a heart attack. The DOH is the nearest. We called them because we said, you are incumbent to do it because it's in the CEDAW resolution. Nothing happened. Personal friends that I contacted to help me convene a meeting with the Department of Health Secretary. Everything failed. Everything. Not even the intra-agency task force that was supposed to be formed to implement the resolution. We were called twice. We really canceled everything, gave up everything to attend just to say that it's postponed, and it was never reconvened. So that's the CEDAW. That's how our government treats our people.
And that's recent. That's very recent. So I think it helps with your question, right? That's, yeah. So thank you very much, ma'am, for helping out in the answers. It just happened this year.
Because the March 8th,
2023.
we got,
yeah.
March 8, 2023, we got the resolution.
Yeah.
So we immediately convened, and then we talked with the Commission of Human Rights. We thought that they may be the most reasonable to lead. We talked with the Department of Justice, Department of Health. DSWD was the one who gave 30,000 to the Malaya Lolas because they're more organized. Okay, so that's March. So we got something about September. We had to complete all. You ask somebody 95 years old for her birth certificate. We said that she is alive, proof that she was born, so don't ask for the, I mean, there's so many horror stories, funny, we are all laughing, but it makes you cry, right? So as recent as the last victim was, who died was January, so we were asking them again for help, no? Because at least hospitalization, because he died without anything. We had to solicit wheelchairs, we had to solicit commodes for these Lolas. Handful of them, very few of them still surviving. Okay.
That's why it's really still ongoing, because the CEDAW just happened 2023.
Yeah, ongoing. We had a big meet with Lila Shahani just this January. We wanted really to name people to help force the government to do something. But so far, we failed, and we still keep on organizing protest rallies. We had already 3 in front of the Japanese embassy. Of course, they will always chase us off, but it doesn't stop us. And many things. And it's our government. It is our own government who caused the statue to be removed because of the pressure of the Japanese. And we learned that from the Japanese newspaper who published a statement of the economic minister that in his meeting with Duterte, he said it's the building of the subway is incumbent on you removing the statue. So they stealthily, because I asked the Manila police to guard the statue. When we saw the backhoe, because of my friendship with Manila, because I called up Joseph Estrada, the mayor, he said, no, the backhoe doesn't belong to Manila. So I said, okay, I'm asking the Manila police to guard it. And they guarded it, the backhoe suddenly disappeared, but in the middle of the night, on a Friday, it came back. At 2 o'clock in the morning, I received frantic calls. They're removing it. So the next day, it's gone.
Front seats to what happened, right?
Yeah, I mean, San Francisco, the Japanese even pulled out the ambassador. Sydney, they boycotted and nobody gave in and succumbed to Japanese pressure except the Philippines. And we built so many shrines and so many statues for the Japanese war dead, including the Kamikaze shrine in Mabalacat, Pampanga, very near the Mapaniki, where they raped the women as young as 12 years old. The surviving lolas were 12 years old when it happened. No? So it's 40. You count. I think she's 90. She's the one who's 92. So that I mean, despite all the efforts, but we're not giving up. We are thankful that they removed the statue because the Flowers for Lolas campaign was able to unite the Gabriela, the Lila Filipina, the Malaya Lolas, the Compañeras. So that's why it's called Flowers for Lolas, because it's all the groups got together to advocate for the return of the statue and for the implementation of the CEDAW and all these things. Okay, thank you. Sorry,
Thank you very
I'm
No,
not
no,
the
ma'am.
speaker.
No, this is important. I even have this. I mean, she's fighting for this. I mean, she's been fighting for this. She's giving her. Yes. No, but she's fighting for this. We've known her as that's a fighter. Okay, there's a fighter
We're the
there.
one who helped the Lolas.
Yeah.
We're the ones who they ran to when
Yeah.
they needed wheelchair, when they needed ambulance, when they need. It's easier for us because we just call and then the FEU students even go house to house to the Lolas to visit them. Something which the Department of Health should do, but it takes efforts from our doctors to get them to do something as little as checking the blood pressure, checking the blood sugar. The Malaya Lolas in Mapaniki are very healthy. I mean, the doctors really take their hats off. I think because they're very poor, they walk, they live very simple life compared to the volunteers who visit them, who have heart attack, 60 years old, using a cane. The Lolas there just walk without using a cane.
Thank you very much. I hope now that we're learning a lot, right? We're learning a lot. Who would want to go? Who was? Okay, I think the lady there at the back. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
There we go. Firstly, I would ask a question to our ma'am. Is how could the audience help? Because this is an ongoing issue, and a part of remembering it is turning things into action also. So very important was it to hear from you how people could help, and using this platform especially. I know it's not lost on me that it is an ongoing issue, and this is an ongoing event also. The significance of us remembering this is part of the movement to do something.
Last February 9, during the Memoriam event, if you don't know the Memoriam Manila, it's the statue for the 100,000 civilians killed when the Japanese army was withdrawing. So every year we have a big event in Intramuros for that. We gathered 3 of the oldest survivor of the rampage to talk about this. So they asked me to share my information. So I said, I think it would take. We have given up using formal channels. We wrote letters. Our lawyers are on top because the CEDAW resolution was submitted by the Malaya Lola, the Center for Law of UP, and all of this. So I don't know, formal channels seem not to work. So maybe we need a bigger campaign or a bigger mass action to do it. So there was a big event in Ateneo. It was very well attended. The Lolas spoke there. And I was hoping that the young students would help us. But when we had three successive mass actions and called on them to help, at least add numbers, warm bodies. Their students are always notoriously busy. Busy. We can understand. So I don't know oh, you asked me what else can you do. Maybe what we are planning is one bigger action, political action, political in front probably of Malacanang to force the government, because it's a resolution and they agreed to do that. That's when the Department of Justice agreed to meet with us. But nothing happened after they replied. They replied September to the CEDAW resolution and said it's imaginary than real. We were really shocked because we thought they would already do it, because the DSWD started giving 30,000 already for those who were able to produce all the requirements. But then, subsequent action, I thought we will succeed at least with DOH, but it also failed. So as you asked me, what else? We were thinking maybe a bigger political action that would be a cross-section, not only us in the Flowers for Lolas, but cross-section of the citizenry to force them. No? Kasi nakakahiya kasi tayo lang ang lumuhod in front of the Japanese. They will continue to help us. They will continue their support of our subway and everything. Even if we kept the statue, no? Because but they were not able to do anything in any other countries except the Philippines. No? So I don't know, maybe you can give me your name later on. I will campaign for you to help us keep the memory alive, keep the issue alive, keep writing about it. We're the only ones who write about it. Maybe ask the media, maybe media coverage for this, to keep writing about it. Last March 8, there were a lot of articles on the comfort women because of our agitation. But these are private help with friends in the media. But if some of you are writers, we continue. Let's continue to. The show on UP is very, very well attended. It has gone on for almost 2 years now. A play on the comfort women, Maria Henson's story. It's always very well attended. No? Things like that, action like that, to keep the memory alive. Kasi as a tribute to the resilience of these women who continue to fight, who continue to come with us even if they had difficulty walking. Even as a thank you to them and tribute to them for their resilience.
We are very grateful for your presence here, Ms. Teresita Ang. We have a number of questions from the audience, but the Zoom line is also very long. So what I'm going to do is, in response to the end of this question, I'm going to ask a Zoom question, which is directly related, from an attendee who says, what further areas of research can we make to support this issue? For instance, what are the other gaps in the research, and how can other fields, such as literature, help ensure that these narratives are heard and told? Recommendations for further reading would also be great. FHL has you covered. There is a book list that we will show later, but of course, Kate, you're also welcome to give recommendations.
Okay, because the thing is, I actually have a list as well, because my sources are like, there's a lot. Actually, I've been researching on this for a couple of months already, and in fact, when I was talking to Charlene, I was overwhelmed because there's really a lot of information that needs to be put together. And I think the first and foremost, there's a gap. I've noticed it when I was looking at all the published works. There really was no, like what I introduced to you a while ago, there really was no story that actually tells you what happened from start to finish. And sometimes we need to have just simple overview pa lang, right, of that whole story. There's a lack in the writing. Because what you would see usually would be biographies, autobiographies, narratives. And I was really telling her, but sabi ko nga, the plate is full, no, because there's so much to be written. But I said, there's not even a topic, it's always a problem, of women's stories during the Japanese occupation. I'm not saying that there aren't, there's about guerrilla women, right? There's about, but it's all in disparate places. Magkakaiba, walang connection. It all stands on its own. So I think as gap, there's not even a gap. There's something that actually is, you need to have, like, if it's an advertising thing, you need an omnibus. right? Because there's no such thing. There would be basically like, for example, this beautiful book of Amazon and the Hooks, right, by Lanzona. It's really beautiful. It's wonderful. It's deep. But again, that's one thing. And then all of the passages that we looked here, and the Kwentong Bayan done by Quintanar and Camagay. But there's really no story. That's why when I saw the exhibit of Women and War by the Filipino Heritage Library, I said, that actually is already a start. Because if you can write that into a book, to actually tell the story. And it's coming from my perspective because I'm right now revising my book manuscript for American period women. Because that's what I'm writing right now. There's no such thing as well as an overview of what happened to women during the Japanese occupation. Alam mo yun yung parang the Mindanao book right now that came out, it's like a seminal work about Mindanao, wherein all Mindanao authors actually vaulted in and wrote about Mindanao. The title sort of, I can't seem to find it in my head right now, but I can see the book, no? So I think not just a gap, but there's really that whole thing that could actually, if I need a book about women during Japanese occupation, I can have that. And the thing is sometimes like, because it's hard to write about it. And I think that's the reason why when John actually invited me here, I said, oh my God, I have to buckle in for this topic because this is complex. Right? So, but if we can put that all together, the stories of the women, that really will help. Because there's a lot of gaps.
Thank you, Kate. Could we have the microphone brought to the right side? The woman in white, because she has been repeatedly raised.
Thank you. I'm actually curious if there are studies or programs as to how to address the PTSD of these comfort women, because I read a narrative, although it's not a Filipina. It's Sandakan Brothel number 9. It's a comfort woman. It's a Japanese comfort woman, and it's a narrative of her life after what she experienced. And I noticed that since this period covers 11 years old to 20, it actually covers the adolescent period of a woman. And so they missed a lot of milestones. I think some of them don't even know how to write, how to cook, or basic homemaking skills. And so probably if they survived after this period, they don't know how to go back to society. And so, I'm curious as to how did we address this? Because what I've seen is the reparations in terms of monetary assistance. But I think there are certain areas that you cannot really pay. And, they cannot live again just to have those years of adolescent years that were basically stolen from them.
Okay, that's interesting. That's why I actually also used this book called Justice with Healing. I was actually very interested with that because all of the other books and works that I looked at, they they talked about reparations and stuff, but the idea of actually getting a psychologist or a psychiatrist to actually talk to the women, that book actually points out that these specific women had to went through consultations with psychologists, but as pointed out a while ago, that needs money. So most of the psychologists that they got were pro bono, right? But the thing is, there's no like a comfort station. There's no systematic, institutionalized way of actually ascertaining the PTSD issues of these comfort women. As pointed out, if you can't even give medical help, how much more for that? So it's really problematic because the solutions should, and the thing is, they're all passing away, right? And so, ang hirap kasi parang kailangan mo muna ng sistema para masagot yung mga problema nila. Pero kung yung sistema ng gobyerno hindi binibigay yung problema, yung sagot sa problema, paano yun? Kung yung simpleng ang wheelchair or yung simple lang na gamot para sagutin yung, or simpleng sasakyan para pumunta sa ospital, hindi matuunan or mapunanan, problema na yon. Mas mahal ang psychologist. But Kaya nung pag binabasa ko rin nga ito, parang sabi ko, ako nga nagbabasa pa lang, parang feeling ko natatrauma na ako eh. It's really true, right? It's really true. That's why this was one of the first, because when I did American Period, I also talked about the shadowy side of women, right? And I was talking about the criminal and the victim, right? I was talking about that. It was already heavy. But this was different. Because I can, historian, I can consume data like crazy for hours on end. But there was a point here talagang hindi ko kaya. As in, even just reading a couple of narratives, tumitigil ako. Sabi ko, hindi ko kaya because I'm getting traumatized. Because babae ako. Diba? Alam, paano pa sila? Diba? So kaya nga sabi ko, that's why, for a while, talagang inisip ko, oo ba ako sa topic na to? But then, as pointed out, kailangan siyang pag-usapan. And I'm in a space that I have the capacity to talk about it. And so I use the platform, right? So parang sabi ko, so with that there were, but it should not be like that because it should be also systematic. Because we already know that PSTD would have a process on how to actually manage that. Diba? That takes time and takes a lot of hours of counseling. So, ma'am.
For the comfort women.
There were.
Because it's only 1990. That was the first thing that Rene Cayetano, our Secretary of Foreign Affairs then, nung tinanggal yung statue, the first thing he said was, tapos na yung reparations 1945. How could you give reparations for somebody for something that you did not recognize until 1992, tsaka lang lumabas yung mga Filipino comfort. There was never any reparations. The SEDO pera na binibigyan ng DSWD is not reparations.
Yeah.
That's why si Lila Filipina didn't want to accept it.
Right.
Because
right.
They are still fighting for the reparations
For
the comfort women.
Yeah. Yeah.
Kaya ayaw namin gamitin yung word na reparations not to confuse
Yes.
because it is something that we're asking the Japanese government to pay for the comfort women.
And just to give you perspective on what ma'am talked about, because there was a point wherein they were saying in the 1950s that we gave you already money. We already gave you reparations. And so what would happen there is that they would say na, everything in the war, yun na yun. So may usapan doon na hindi yun na kami kukulitin uli kasi binigyan na namin kayo ng pera. But as pointed out, 1992 pa lang lumabas to eh. So hindi siya kasama doon sa sinasabing yung reparation. Right? So, yeah.
We will switch to Zoom again,
Okay.
a Zoom question, and then back to the
Okay,
audience.
okay.
This question is actually a pre-registration question, but it has also appeared again in Zoom, so I'm going to ask it. Are there any moves or petitions to include the story of comfort women in the World War II sections of textbooks and reading materials that are used in public schools to state universities? In other words, how can we make this narrative more visible in really official discourse?
That's a rabbit hole. It really is, right? Kasi when the K-12 happened, right, there were already issues about how to write our history. And there were fights on how to write it, what to write, what's there, what shouldn't be. And in fact, this was actually part of the campaign of all of these organizations, these Lolo organizations. It's part and parcel because part of the things that they wanted was not just reparation, apology, but also the inclusion of the historical narratives within the history books. Kaya napahinga na lang ako ng malalim eh. Kasi ang daming laban na nangyayari sa kung ano ang ilalagay mo sa kasaysayan ng bayan. At maraming gatekeepers na nagsasabing, ilagay mo to, wag mong ilagay ito. And as pointed out, right, by Leela Shahani in her article, Political Economy, right? Anong uunahin mo? At yun nga, as pointed out by ma'am, ang nauuna talaga ay yung national development. And so naiiwan tong mga bagay na pinaglalaban natin. Sorry, sometimes I revert to Filipino. Okay, I'm so sorry, I reverted to Filipino. I was like, because sometimes it's really, I can express it, and there's a little bit more emotion where that comes from. No? But that's why Of course, there's a fight for it. It's actually included in the points that the organizations, the Lola organizations, are actually going for. They want to open documents during the Japanese occupation so that everybody can finally know what's there. Reparation, apology, historical inclusion. As for that, again, as I said, that's a rabbit hole, which cannot be explained in this talk. There.
And I love it. It's like a race to put their hands up. The gentleman actually, it's the gentleman with the blue shirt. A tip for our online audience, our on-site audience, because the mics are giving us trouble. If you hold it too low, it creates static. So when you're given the mic, try to keep it further up.
Yeah, good afternoon, ma'am. As part of the academe myself, just like you, I'm from Adamson University. I just want to ask if there are updates with regard to our curriculum, because we have the subject called Readings in Philippine History. I teach political science and social science courses, and I've noticed that there's no part in our syllabus in Readings in Philippine History that talks about the things that you're telling us right now. Well, I think it should be compelled, no? So that the stories would not die, and the students would be more informed. And of course, they would. I mean, it's a heavy topic, but I think we should pass on those stories so that we can see that the whole picture, and that history will not be sanitized. Because I believe the more we sanitize it, the more we pollute history. So as part of the academe myself, I would just like to ask any of your suggestions or I think comments, aside from this platform of inviting us in talks like this. How can we sort of include this one to our lectures or lessons in classes? Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you for that, because it's actually really an issue. And in fact, when you think of the academe, there are so many issues that everybody wants to include, especially in the story of in Philippine history. There's like, it's all very Manila-centric. Why can't we talk about Visayas and Mindanao, right? Why don't we talk about those issues that are just dying on the side? I teach also readings in Philippine history, right? I think that's one of the things, is to include it. Because it's the problem is not everybody knows about it, diba? Only a few people would have the handle on the topic. So parang it's the chicken or the egg, sinong mauuna? Right? Kailangan mo ng manunulat at magsusulat at magpa-publish. That's a problem, because that again takes money. Right? So what we usually do is like, and especially for me that I'm a women historian, right? I try to just integrate it into, like, what we just finished Japanese occupation in my class. No? And so I would say that there was somebody who was pointing out, they did a game, because I with gamified Japanese occupation. And the group said, comfort stations and comfort women. They were talking, comfort stations are, and then they would say, they were relaxation places, they were restrooms, they were, women were actually raped, etc., etc. So parang talaga, game. They made it into a game. And then afterwards, I explained to them that actually when you were saying that it's a they were saying, is it a restroom? It was tongue-in-cheek, di ba? Sabi nila restroom. But then I told them that there really were writings during that time, that comfort women were actually euphemistically also called toilets, wherein you go in, you throw it in, then you leave. Right? So when you think about it, these are little things that I can do. But the thing is, in order for that to be integrated, there should be also teachers teaching teachers. Because that's information that needs to be shared. And that, again, is another process that can be done. That's why in Ateneo we have called Turo Guro, wherein we actually have this time, wherein, right, AC, wherein we have a couple of sessions wherein we choose topics. Like last year, the topic I think was martial law. And so we were talking about martial law in different aspects, whether it's cultural, social, political. So I think we need to have more of turo guros in order for us to, who know, to multiply and parang ano siya, yung pyramiding. Right, I mean, that's the only way to say it, pyramiding, so that the information will be able to trickle down to more people, right? Another thing is, I think, with the issue of gender inclusivity right now being very, very strong, and it's in fact already instigated by CHED. I think that all universities should be having their gender hubs. I think that is also a good way and a good space for this topic to actually be talked about. And I think slow maybe, but that's a good entry point to be able to talk about this. Right? Because that's gender sensitivity, gender inclusivity, gender history, right? So these are just some things in my head, because I get you, I feel you. And then the thing is, we only have a SEM to actually explain everything. How do you do that? How do you do that? With all the typhoons as well, holidays and stuff, no? So parang ganyan, di ba? And you have 5 classes, you only have 1 body, di ba? Parang ganon, di ba? So things like that. So I think we need to be able to think of how to multiply ourselves. Yeah. Thank you.
This is not a question, but it's a comment worth reading. It's from our Facebook live stream, and there is a teacher there who is inspired. They are saying, I am including this topic when I teach literature in the Philippines. So we are already having some effect. Moving on to the Zoom, we have a question from a longtime FHL supporter. Thank you for joining us again. This is Jose Matthew Luga, who writes, thank you for the lecture, Dr. Lacson, for putting women front and center in this discussion. My question is, what does the People's Court trial say about the comfort women? Have you happened by chance to peruse through these materials?
Okay, I perused a little bit on that one. It's the trial in Hague, if I'm correct about it, right? So parang, sabi ko nga sa inyo, I'm like, I've been in, and it's not easy. That's why I felt like there's a shadow over my head every time I'm like walking around. And my friends would know this, no? Parang, it's heavy. And I have to, it's actually written here in my notes, no? Na parang they were stating that in the Hague trials, it was really pointed out that there was really crime. But the problem with the Hague trials is that it's not a legitimate court. And the beauty of that is, since it's not a legitimate court, it does not have the usual policies that you would need in order for you to litigate. But the problem is, it also doesn't have the power to actually say, now, since this is a crime, this is what you pay for. This is the consequence. So, and that's a lot, no? There's a lot there, no? So when you think about it, that was a very important People's Court trial. But again, there needs to be push from all the countries. Kasi it's not just us that was affected, but by everybody else. No? So there was that. There was crime, there was aggression, there was rape, there was sexual slavery. But then, what were the consequences for that? Who gets to pay?
Yes, and it really is a race. The gentleman in the second row in the blue shirt. Microphone.
Okay, good afternoon again. Thank you very much for this very detailed and weighty discussion. At the risk of, how do you call this, opening a rabbit hole in this conversation, are there emerging discourses, or have historians and historiographers come to terms with how the narrative of war crimes in general in the Second World War, but specifically this, has also been exploited or flat out suppressed by militarists of Asian countries due to contemporary geopolitical interests? Now, we speak of how the Philippines maintains ties with Japan because of economics, but the current administration's policy of, establishing ties with the United States and Japan is as much establishing ties against the People's Republic of China, who is also a historical victim, but is also complicit with a lot of military aggression now. Is it fair for us to say that this conversation is not for historiography, or we must contend with it sooner than later? Because these stories are being exploited in the name of patriotism and mobilization, and yet our governments are not doing anything. Because if our governments and our historians are not doing it, propagandists are going to do it for us. Thank you.
Hansley, right? Hi, Hansley. Okay, so I remember you from our... Okay, so here's the thing. That's a rabbit hole. You're correct about that. That's a rabbit hole. And I'm now trying to piece some puzzle together in my head about that, no? Hirap sagutin, actually, no? Ang hirap sagutin, no? Kasi with historians, specifically, we have specializations. And not everybody talks about all the topics. We have to venture into our specializations. So that is good in a way because you get to get information from us that's really deep if it's our specialization. But the problem is, since we're only few and far between, I mean, sabihin, bakit mo kukunin history? Wala ka namang kikitain dyan, di ba? Parang yung mga ganon, di ba? I mean, that's part and parcel of it, right? So how many historians can you actually count in your hands? And how many feminist historians do you have? Right? And from the feminist historians, how many talks about American period, Japanese occupation, martial law? So, ang hirap. And so that's why we just try to make... we all try to contribute, no? We try to contribute. And then, yun nga, but it's important because talaga nagkakaroon ng propaganda, especially, it's hard to counteract, especially when you have social media, wherein everybody has a voice. And everybody is, ano ba yun, parang specialist. Ganyan, diba? So, it's really hard when you think about it, especially if you give them information, they'd rather have the sensational one rather than the factual one. So that's why you were correct when you were saying, yeah, it's being used as propaganda. But it's so hard when you fight, parang sabi nung pamangkin ko kaninang isa, fight the trolls, di ba? Parang ganyan, di ba? But how? No? So I think there's so many factors to think of in order for that question to even be slightly answered. Kasi malalim siya. I mean, it's a matter of political scientists coming into the fore, helping out with the anti-propaganda of just also stating the real words for it, right? Because once it's now happening in current events and it's politicized, the political scientists can come into the fore and help out. But again, that's another thing because political scientists also have their own specializations, di ba? So, ang dugo niya at malalim siya. So, parang sa akin nga na parang, I have a good friend who's also an academic and he would always say na parang sometimes sabi niya, wag mong dalhin lahat ng burdens ng mundo, hindi mo kakayanin. So what you need to do is to just make sure that whatever platform you have, you use it and to share. Because as I said, I was talking to Charlene, I'm a very private person. I'm very private. For me to do this in front of you, sabi ko, ang hirap, trabaho ko magturo. pero I'm so private. But sabi ko nga, this needed to be done. Because in a way, nabubuhay lang yung story ng comfort women pag March 8 or Women's History. Right? And then after that, sabihin lang, hindi naman yan yung topic ngayon, let's talk about something else. So I hope, right, that that's, kung baga, pag gagawa ka, parang network analysis ang mangyayari dyan eh. Right? It's network analysis because it's a bunch of hubs and points that needs to be connected. And still, when you connect networks, there's going to be another network that needs to be connected to that. So, the dissertation might not be able to answer that question. Yeah.
Kate, we have a question, moving back to Zoom briefly, and then your question. This is interesting because it really is talking about narratives now. An anonymous attendee asks, I wonder how the experiences of these comfort women affected their family dynamics. How supportive were their families and husbands for those who got married? Are there studies on how the experiences of these comfort women affected the attitudes and perspectives of their children toward men and relationships?
Okay, the first answer is from the corpus that I have right now, because there's still more research that needs to be done, right? I haven't found, the question was the specific topic on perspectives coming from family. I mean, the only one of the few ones that I saw was My Mother is More Than a Comfort Woman, right? That biography. That's why I loved it. Because it actually shows you the family dynamics, no? But there will the story of woman is already found in the snippets or the debris of history. And you have to dig, and you have to read all of these things, no? So that's why I was saying that if there was an omnibus of this specific history, then it would be easier to talk about it. No? Ang hirap eh. Na parang, there's a narrative, they would say, like a while ago I said, right, that people were even repressing their families from the comfort women from talking about it because it affects the reputation. There was a Lola, it's a small vignette, no, in one of the readings that I had that said, she came from a family with means. And she was saying, ganito ha, kasi na-rape siya kasama nung 2 helpers niya. That she was raped with her 2 helpers. And they had to go back to the house. And what happened was when the helpers, who were also her parang yayas, no, were saying, okay, when we go back home, you just say that we tripped, we were a little bit late, there was a little bit of blood, because, again, they were afraid of what will happen to the reputation of the family if they actually talked about it, even within the family. And I'm not saying that all families are like that, because as pointed out in the organizations, Pamana is actually an organization of families supporting comfort women, right? They're the families of the comfort women. But a study like that, I have not yet seen that really focuses on that, no?
And we have a question in the front row, actually. Or are you still going to ask?
So I actually have my grandmothers, they both grew up during the war, and they've told me stories as well, what they personally went through at that time. And you also mentioned something with the hidden battle of Leyte. I actually wanted to know if there are records of girls and women, like even younger than 11 years old, that were actually getting taken by the Japanese as comfort slaves, or even, grooming them to be like that.
Sadly, there were. I can't remember right now the source because I read so much, no? But there was actually, they were 8, 7. There were. And yun nga eh, and when you read the things that they did, you really will have to stop at some point. It's too heavy. That answers your question, right? Yeah.
Actually, the head of our library, he won the race, okay? I can see everybody up front here, and he really did have his hand up first. I'm not being biased.
Charlene, thank you for giving me the microphone. This is actually, I wanted to take advantage of the question earlier by recalling what Carl Cheng-Chua said last time about the need to be critical when history becomes memory. Because then if it's, some people become dismissive, right? They say it's just memory. You then have the accusation of it's more imaginary than real. So the question earlier was about records, and I'm calling on hive mind here, an appeal to our audience. What kind of documents would you need to corroborate testimony from the biographies that you've read and the oral histories? I was going to say the horror histories. The oral histories that you read. What kind of documents would you need, to corroborate the narratives that you're piecing together so that people don't question that it is in fact history?
Can I add to that question? Sorry, we're tag teaming.
Okay.
Because for me, it's also beyond documents, but what elements of like material history, if we extend it beyond, well, yes, traditional documents in that sense, what material history would you need to corroborate the stories?
That's hard. Okay, so here's the thing. The usual tools of a historian would be official documents coming from government. That would really be that. photos, but how can you have photos, right? A student of mine this Thursday was asking, "Mommy, we're looking for pictures of comfort stations." I said, Mom, it's hard to find representation. I know. Because that's not something, even though they're very systematized about this, I think Japan doesn't want that to be known, right? So that is always the dilemma. That's why I loved it when Carl actually, because I watched his presentation as well. And I was like saying, yeah, that's why I needed to really talk about the power of oral history. Because when you think about it, wala namang nagsasabi na mali yung mga, our rhymes, our riddles. These were passed on from one generation to another, and we don't actually ask the question if it's legitimate. I think the problem here is that the reason why it's being asked if it's legitimate is politics. And that's why if you are being asked a question that is geared towards politics, you need documents coming from that world in order for them to really see. Because for them, the real documents are government documents. And that's why, again, I go back to what the organizations are fighting for. Open the archives. So let us see what's there without burning things, right? As for your question about material history, again, how? Right? It's very, very hard to actually find material history to actually prove a point. What would be the artifacts that could actually be able to capture that? But basically, not material, right?
But
yeah.
she did it. I
yeah,
mean,
the illustrations,
she
definitely.
She's a very good artist.
Yeah.
It's very graphic. She
Yeah.
drew her
Rosa
ordeals.
Henson, she did. And that's why I had to go through her documents in Aliu. I had to dig deep, no, and look at the documents. But the thing is, sometimes, again, the governments would say, but that's already something that is biographical or autobiographical. And so, the actual thing like a cell phone during the time, or a photo, or a house that actually shows you. I mean, kung isipin mo, parang material artifact nga yung, or space of, pero contentious yung space, yung bahay na pula. But even that, they're saying, no, that's just the house. Why are you saying that it's like this? Diba? Parang, so, again, that's why I go back to the thing I said a while ago. Oral documents, oral history, spoken word is very important, especially in the study of women. Oh, okay. Because I actually looked at all the newspapers of that. I really went dig. I dug deep because I have another topic about Japanese women during the time. So I went through Tribune. I went through all of the newspapers of that time. You have to remember that it was being held by the Japanese. It was very much controlled, and it actually was a site of propaganda. So that's problematic. Looking at possible sources from the outside, right, from newspapers coming from the other. I looked at some, actually. I did look at some, but I have yet to find them talking about comfort women, especially since even that word, comfort, it's very recent. It's very new, right? So, ang hirap. It's really hard. It's really very hard. That's why women historians, I mean, like for me, I had to dig deep. AC is also a women, he studies women, no, in American period. We have to always dig deep. It's like, I looked at newspapers during my research for American period. I had to go through page 6, page 7, not page 1. I had to go through everything in order for me to be able to actually construct the story. Because most of the stories were about men. That's why even a friend, a colleague of ours who does gender, Dr. Santos, she was saying that, Kate, did you find maybe a photo of somebody who was gay or cross-dressing? I said, I actually did, because I really scoured the whole thing. I found 2 now. There's 2 more. I found more. Yeah, so I found more. So, but the thing is, 2 out of thousands, right? So there is that. There is that problem.
Now would be a really wonderful time to promote FHL Holdings because we are talking about periodicals. We actually have online, available completely free, the complete Shinseki periodical that you can access through OPAC. And I was going through it for this talk, and let me just say that the Japanese propaganda is very, very impressive if you are able to access it.
I have a reason. I can support this. Now, the reason why, again, if you have, they have a system for comfort stations, they definitely have a system for propaganda.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
That's why it's so strong. Yeah.
Kate, would you be willing to extend? I'm running out of time.
Okay.
How's your energy?
Okay. Later, as I told them, on Monday I'll be singing 4 hours video okay after this one. Yeah. I need to lighten up actually because I've been imbibing the stories for so long. I need to actually find fun. Yeah.
Okay. So can I get 15 more minutes? Because the line of questions here is just so long. I'm not even halfway through. We actually have a wonderful question here from one of the women's groups. It's a bit long. I'll just read it. Your presentation on the topic of comfort women reflects a commendable commitment to justice and remembrance. We believe that shedding light on the significant aspect of history is timeless and relevant. We are undergraduate researchers, and we are currently focusing on the institutional history of Lila Pilipina as an avenue in amplifying the voice of comfort women. On behalf of our group, may we ask your insights about the said organization. We would also want to ask if you would be willing to share further insights or engage in discussion regarding this crucial topic. We would be honored to know your perspectives and insights. Please let us know if you would be open to being contacted for further dialogue. No rest, Kate, no rest.
Okay, I'll answer the last question first. Yes, you can contact me, and then I would also, if she's watching, there's another lady who went to my other talk in another museum. I'm sorry I haven't answered you yet because the plate is so full. She was asking me about American period stuff. So yes, you can contact me, but please give me time to answer because there's just really so much on my plate. I really need to do video okay on Monday. As for the Lila Filipina, if it's okay, but if it's not okay, is it okay, ma'am, if you sort of like have your own, we have good source here. I'm going to primary source, you know. So if I'm going to primary source, I'm going to also mine that primary source. Is it okay, ma'am, if you can also give an answer? So you already have access.
The Lila Pilipina office, where some of the lolas still stay and where they support the lolas, the whole office has a whole wall of photos of these comfort women, and that is where we gather every Christmas when we give them care packages from all over. And then so I'm sure if they're doing it, study on Lila Filipina, they're very open to help. It's just that it's also a very difficult time for them. They lost again one of their volunteers. It's almost a one-person operation. Also, Sharon Silva is the only one. We help her as much as we can, but she's the executive director. But as usual, we have no funding on those things. Just to plug, maybe if some of you know the Ilusorios, the Bahay na Pula, and the government there, I have some commitments of funds to buy that place, to make it into a museum. But efforts again failed to talk to the local government. The best way is to expropriate that land because the Ilusorios have not paid for the taxes and everything. Expropriate that and then sell it to
private, no? The guerrilla groups, the Chinese guerrilla groups are willing to raise funds to buy the property. So sorry, I have to, because I'm very forgetful. I had to segue to the bahay na pula because the Lila Pilipina and us and the Malaya Lolas are the ones who really wanted to help, really help if it's possible to negotiate to get the bahay na pula. It's no longer there. The Acusars, I heard the Acusars have taken the remaining structure, but the place is still very memorable for Mapanigi because that's where the women were kept, no? So that's one of the things that maybe the girl who is doing research can help us research, no? Find out how to get in touch with the Bahay na Pula owners, the local government, and all these things. Help us in these efforts so we can have the Sidore solution. One of Sidore's solution is to build a shrine and keep the memory alive. Yeah.
And to also add to some of her questions, fast lang. Lila Pilipina actually started as TFCW. They were the task force for comfort women that now transformed into Lila Pilipina. It was started by Inday Sahor and Nelia Sancho. And then I suggest, since they're researching, the first thing that they need to do is the Facebook and the website because everything's there. And then I looked at because everything's there. And then what you can do is actually interview. The director right now which is Miss Silva, right? So I think that's a good jump off point so that they really can get a better, clearer perspective about the organization itself. Yeah.
Thank you, both of you, for that wonderful answer. Is there, actually, the both of you have had your hands up for so long, I'm feeling so guilty already. Could we have a microphone for the woman in the third row?
Okay pa kayo?
My microphone?
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
Good afternoon. So my question is quite similar to one of the previous ones, but there were reports this time last year that our current president, I don't really want to say his name, he directed government agencies to address the concerns raised regarding Filipino comfort women. However, has there been a direct response or a concrete action to rectify from the authorities to rectify and support these remaining survivors at the present time? Since I haven't seen any reliable reports regarding this matter, despite the fact that most Filipinos like myself spend a significant amount of time online. Thank you.
From the online stuff, as I said, same thing. The current president, no answer. The paper report, imaginary and real, and as pointed out a while ago by Ma'am Teresita, 30,000. And that's about it. Sad, no? Yeah. Okay.
Continuing this education thread, we have a comment from Facebook that says, "Thank you for this, but do we have a legislation?" I can't quite read this. A legislation for the care and reparation. If there is none, can we lobby for that? Can the CHED demand an inclusion of this in the curriculum?
Ma'am, can I give this question to you? Yeah. Tandem kami ngayon. Tandem. Okay.
Actually, there are already resolutions filed in Congress for legislation to force the government to implement, because it needs an enabling law. The solution, UN resolution is nothing. You have to implement it. So there are resolutions. The Central Law has already drafted the bills for the implementation of the CEDAW resolution, the one that he said that the president reacted. I think he reacted maybe too soon and said, you have to implement it. So they were at first scrambling to work on it. The Department of Justice said they are willing to meet with us. The Department of Human Rights said they will convene the
the intra-agency task force to implement, but nothing came out when they answered, when the government gave already the reply to the CEDAW. That is imaginary. Everything is imaginary rather than real. So with that kind of response from our government, so what do we expect? But we hope that the bill, well, it's wishful thinking maybe, because it's filed, it's there, resolutions are there. The bill, I think it's, we are asking for friends, probably the better from the Senate, because you have the women senators there. Maybe they are willing to help. Sila Risa Hontiveros, maybe even Grace Po, will help us file the necessary legislation to implement the CEDAW resolution.
Thank you very much, ma'am. And in relation to that, parang plugging na rin to, no? Because my co-editor, I have a book coming out on April 22, and it's about environmental history. Barako, it's basically the people of San Juan, Batangas actually fighting against the copper smelter in the 1970s during martial law. And one of the things that they did was to actually they actually fought to have a bill about environmental protection in Batangas in relation to the launching of the book, because it's always important to have policy. So it's not just about the information, but there's also legislation that supports basically in a way, it's an advocacy, right? It really is, yeah. So.
Yes, going back to Zoom. This is expanding the topic a little, but an anonymous attendee asks, having had access to various documents and historical narratives, is there any truth about comfort gaze?
Okay, I will answer as I said, if I can't, I can't, okay? Because the thing is, in my research, and that's the thing, historians would always hold on to their research. I cannot have any answer for that as of the moment, because from the readings and the documents that I found, I could not find them. And that's even harder. That's even harder, because that's another can of worms altogether. That's another rabbit hole, no? Women were already a problem, how much more for, finding the women was already a problem, how much more the gay community. No, so maybe, hopefully, sometime in the future, maybe some historian will actually be able to find the sources. But right now, with the documents that I have, with the cohort of documents that I have, I cannot, in full honesty, be able to answer that question. Yeah.
We have about 5 minutes left in the Q&A. I can take maybe one more question from the audience and one more Zoom question. Okay, the gentleman in the pink shirt in the front.
This is, sorry. I think this is gonna be part commentary now, so I do have a question at the end. One of the things that's, that struck me when I was in Japan was, in a sense, even among progressive historiographies, there was one museum that was dedicated to tackling about what happened to comfort women in the Second World War. But part of what made it a bit poignant for me is the fact that not a lot of people know about it. It's not as famous as other museums. It's actually tucked in at some building that I almost could not have found if not for the fact that I had some command of the language. And not a lot of people, even Japanese people, know about it apparently, because when I asked around, they said that, you know, the only people that visit the museum regularly are university students that live around the area, because it was in a university. And along with your comment earlier about how society had to change to accommodate the space to allow us to discuss or have discourses on comfort women, the same thing had to happen, well, in Japan. And of course, I guess my question would be, apart from your earlier comment earlier of the regarding the importance of oral history, or at least recognizing the validity of oral history, in describing or attesting to the trauma that these women have experienced. In your view, what other paradigm shifts must we go through in order to allow, in order for more people to acknowledge or to remember the issue of comfort women?
Pang Miss Universe yung sagot, no? No, but the thing is, it's really accepting the fact that women's rights are human rights. And that women, men, LGBTQ+, have all rights. We have to always go back to that. Parang kaya sabi ko napaka-Miss Universe nung sagot, world peace, di ba? Pero, but the thing is, that really is the case. Because if we actually see everybody with compassion and consideration, and that everybody's rights are important, I think that would actually change. But, sabi nga nila, before even that could happen, before any change could happen, there would always be some violence that starts, that begins it, so that you can wash away and cleanse everything in order. And I'm afraid of that. I'm very afraid of that. Because there are things that are happening. No? And by the way, when you said about Japan, one of the other things that the women were also fighting for is that the Prime Minister shouldn't go to the Yasukuni Shrine. Right? Because that's basically where their war heroes are. So again, parang tinuportahan mo kung sino yung nagbiktima sa amin. So I go back to that. It's such a Miss Universe answer. But yes, I liked what a feminist historian, I can't remember right now who she is, but she said, the time that I finish my job and I don't need to do my job is the time that I did my job well. There, yeah.
And I think ending the Q&A with a Miss Universe answer is perfectly appropriate and will bring a little bit of levity to such a serious topic. So thank you, Kate, for your presentation and the discussion.
Can I just also say thank you to everybody who's here and on Zoom? Because I would always say the talk would fall flat if the audience wasn't part of it. Right? So thank you very much for that.
May we ask you to remain up front while I invite the head of the library, John Labelia, to join you. Yes. So as a token of our gratitude, we'd like to present you with a certificate of appreciation. And if you would like to learn more about comfort women or explore other representations of women during World War II, FHL has prepared a special book list. Key titles that were discussed today include Comfort Women, Slave of Destiny by Maria Rosa Henson, the first book on the left, Rites of Passage by Josefa Castro Benitez, second row, third book, the red one. Birthdays in the Cemetery, A Childhood in World War II, Manila, by Katinka Floro Rodriguez. And of course, The Women of Mapanik, Untold Crimes of Women, by the Asian Center for Women's Human Rights, among other titles. Women's studies have always been integral to FHL programming, and in 2019, the library hosted an exhibit on women and war, which Kate very wonderfully mentioned several times during her talk. We hosted this exhibit here at the Ayala Museum, but it was then transformed into a traveling exhibit hosted by Central Philippine University in Iloilo. And today you can now view it as an online exhibit at the Google Arts and Culture platform using the bit.ly link there. You may also scan the QR code in the program that you were given earlier. That will also take you to the exhibit. And if you enjoyed today's free talk, please follow FHL social media pages for updates, as well as Ayala Foundation and the Ayala Museum. You can find us on Facebook, X, Instagram, and YouTube. Thank you everyone for joining us to commemorate Roderick Hall and to preserve the legacy that he entrusted with FHL. We hope that you'll join us next month as FHL launches the second leg of the Jeepney Jazz series, beginning with the Jeepney Jazz Talks. Until then, stay safe and stay healthy.
Rod described himself as a man with a mission and a man in a hurry. His mission was to collect as many materials on the experiences of Filipinos during World War II and to place them in a library that would ensure that these are shared with today's generation as well as those in the future. And he found this repository as well as partners with us in the Filipinas Heritage Library. So in 2010, Rod shipped his entire collection, lock, stock, and barrel, of 700 volumes from his home in London to FHL in Makati. Through the years, his collection has grown to more than 2,000 print and non-print materials on World War II, making the Roderick Hall collection FHL's crown jewel. As such, it is FHL's centerpiece, literally and figuratively, because we now revolve our collection focus around the period immediately before, during, and right after World War II, identified as the formative period of Filipino nationhood.
To collect books and various other historical materials relating to the Philippines during that war and to make this more accessible to the general public. He turned this collection over to the Filipinas Heritage Library, where it now forms a major part of its holdings as the Roderick Hall Collection. But Rod was not one to simply donate books. He wanted other people to use them and to research more on the war. He wanted to add more materials and was constantly in search of new directions for the collection. To this end, he was able to negotiate digitization of numerous manuscripts in various collections around the Philippines. He wanted to provide as many different perspectives as possible, and when he learned of the large body of works in Japanese, aimed to acquire as much as possible for the collection.
Why are you collecting Japanese publications about the Battle of Philippines, even though you do not understand Japanese language? You said to me. I always answer this question like that. I want next future generation to know what happened in Philippines during the Asia Pacific War and the Philippines under Japanese rule. However, you told me the real reason is that collecting Japanese books is to make peace of my mind and making requiem for my deceased family. As a post-war Japanese generation, I promise you to try to make no more war society, and also to try not to create the kind of people such as you and your family horribly experienced in Philippines. I think the Japanese should know the facts of this history. I believe this is my mission as a Japanese.
current thinking on the previous century, with its many upheavals and wars, is that we all have an ethical obligation to remember that history. But understandably, not everyone takes up that burden because the memory of war, especially for persons who witnessed it, is painful. The late Mr. Rod Hall was deeply courageous in that sense of taking up an ethical burden. He took pains to give World War II its proper mourning, not just for himself, but also for our country, America and Japan, whose materials he collected. He helped strengthen our cultural memory in the hope of preventing the return of suffering. And now with his passing, we in turn at Filipinas Heritage Library and the Ayala Foundation have an obligation to make his legacy and his commemoration of history endure.